Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to another episode of Leadership Tidbits. I am your host and leadership mentor, Tywauna Wilson. As always, I have another very special, amazing mentor who is in our learning laboratory tonight. But before I introduce her, please come in, introduce yourself so that we can welcome you in and make sure you share this message out because matter of fact, I know that this is going to be a message that's going to be very impactful for you in your career, in your business, really for your personal brand. So I think this is going to be impactful for you. So come on in and introduce yourself and let us know where you are coming in from again so that we can welcome you in. And while we are waiting for you to come in, I do have a couple of announcements that I wanted to make sure that I bring to your attention of some upcoming events that we are having, and I don't want you to miss out. So that's why I'm listen. You got to be in the room. You got to be in the room for these activities. So the first thing that we have coming up on Thursday, if you haven't already, we have our virtual mentoring workshop that will be on Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can scan the QR code to register. This month, I am covering your fee to get in. So you want to come in and check it out. Our monthly mentoring workshops are part of our Standout Leader Academy Elite memberships. So who you learn from matters, and being in the room where you can get the support and mentoring that you need definitely matters. So make sure you come and check that out, because if you're like, I want to see how it is, come check it out. And you'll see the ongoing mentoring that you will get month after month. Also, if you're a medical laboratory professional and you haven't already, our February roundtable is coming up with our mentor, Lona Small, where she will be talking about medical lab professionals addressing the career progression challenge. And so there is a registration fee for that. It's only $20. But if you are a member, it's only $99 for the year. So you do better getting the annual membership. Plus, those who register for the annual membership by February 23rd, you will get my awesome Land Your Dream Job Toolkit. That's worth over $297. So listen, it to me, it only makes sense. I'm a girl that loves science, and with science comes math. And to me, that's basic. For $99, you getting the Land Your Dream Job Toolkit that has all kind of awesome stuff in there. And you're getting your membership for the year. So you're getting access. So I would say come check it out, and I will see you at the table. So, okay, let's go on with what we have today. We have like I said, another awesome mentor who I'm excited to have in the building with us. And her name is Cassa. Hi,
Hi.
Cassa. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me, Coach T. I appreciate it.
Anytime. I'm super excited to have you in. I will read a little bit of your bio, but me reading it does not do justice because I know you have so much great stuff. So I'll read a little bit about you. So Cassa Grant is the creator of Wonder Brand and Wonder Leader, the coaching programs that help you show up as the kind of leader you want to follow. She helps leaders and small businesses create brands that let them be understood, be interesting, and inspire change. Whoa.
Hey.
Elaborate further.
The big three right there. Yeah. I mean, well, when you're a leader, these are the things that make the most difference, aren't they? If you can't be interesting, people don't care what you're saying. And if you can't, if they don't care what you're saying, you can't get buy-in. You can't get the things done that you think that need to get done. So what we're going to talk about today is a lot about how to concrete ways to do that, so that you're not just over there spinning your wheels. Because we want you to show up as the kind of leader that you want to follow.
Absolutely. That's very important. And now more than ever, you really only have a few minutes to show up. It's like
Mhm.
people, listen, they want to know who you are. They want to be able to see what they're going to get from you right away.
Mhm.
So I'll let you kind of take it away from there. I have my notebook and I'm ready to write down my notes.
Oh, well, thanks. Okay, so well, as you mentioned, so I focus on I specialize in branding because that was my background. I was a copywriter for years, and I did create brands and personal brands for clients. And then I also started to see this overlap with leadership. So I was always passionate about leadership for a long time, actually, and I started to see like people who were good leaders actually when it came to the nitty gritty of thinking about their people and that kind of thing, they struggled because they didn't have strong personal brands, or they weren't able to communicate in a way that really connected with the people that they needed to connect with. And that can be people above you if you're trying to get a raise or a promotion, or it can also be your employees when you're trying to help them understand why you want them to do something the way you want it done, what they need to do, you want and how you don't want them to do it, which actually how not to do things can be just as important as how to do them sometimes, right? So
Mhm.
creating that personal brand to help you, it basically just anchors everything you do. It's your reputation. And so we are creating it no matter what, no matter every single action that you take, everything single thing you say is creating your reputation. So personal branding used to sound really just self-centered to me. I just thought, oh, really? You got your personal brand? Like, it just sounded like, it felt like an Instagram influencer or somebody who seemed really stuck on themselves. I thought that it just seemed really stupid. But the more I got into some of this stuff and started thinking about, well, actually, you know what? It's not just, it's your reputation. It's you figuring out what kind of reputation do I want to cultivate? How do I want people to see me? This is how they already see me, and that's important too. But how do I want to be seen? And sitting down and really thinking about those things. A lot of people don't do that, and so they just kind of have this default personal brand, which isn't necessarily bad. It's just that you're not being intentional about it. And I think that it's always worth it to sit down and be intentional about what you want to do and where you want to go. So I kind of think of it as that as well, of like, okay, well, we've defined these goals, we've defined this thing that we're headed towards, and here's how we're going to get here, and here's how we're going to talk about it while you're getting there. So the framework I want to talk about today, so a lot of that is around how you tell your stories. And a lot of my clients struggle. So I say I work with offbeat leaders, and I would characterize an offbeat leader as somebody who maybe didn't get an MBA or follow what you would call a traditional career path, which I think is getting less and less. I mean, it's more and more common to be an offbeat leader these days, I think. So maybe I need to change my branding. But the thing about the offbeat leader is that they usually have some kind of imposter syndrome about, I don't have this degree, or I wasn't on this path to begin with, and so maybe I'm not quite as legit as I want to be. And you probably see this with your clients a lot too. I mean, you can come to leadership through all kinds of different ways. It's not that, oh, well, I was a little kid who wore a suit and tie and I always thought I was going to be a leader. Like most of us come to it in a way that is very roundabout. But these people, they might not have taken this path, but they find that as they're in these leadership roles, they really like it. They're actually pretty good at it, but they know that they could be better. And those are the people that I really like to work with, because they might have an alternative background, or, I mean, my background is very different in some ways. So, I like to work with people who kind of think of themselves in that way. And one thing that a lot of them will struggle with is how to tell their stories well. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, because that's part of your brand. How you tell your story about yourself, how you tell your stories about yourself to yourself. I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, or that kind of thing. Those are stories. And also how you're telling stories about your work to other people is so important, especially, like I said, if you want to be getting promoted, if you want to get buy-in from your team. So the framework that I wanted to talk about is called and, but, and therefore. So I call it the ABT for short. It's not my original framework. It's this guy who teaches at Arizona State came up with it with this other guy named Park Howell. So Randy Olson's the one who came up with it, and then Park Howell is who I learned it from. But it's such a simple framework, and you'll probably start to hear it a lot as you start to think about it. When I start to talk about it, you'll hear it in all kinds of things. So if you basically, what you want to do is you always want to start with the context of whatever it is you're trying to tell somebody about. Just a little one-line sentence thing of like, oh, I'm telling you about how to tell stories. That's it, right? And I know that a lot of people struggle with telling stories. So that's the and, right? So you start with context, then you go into and, then we go but they either they talk too much, they go ramble on, or they don't tell enough, and then people are not interested in the story. And so then you go to therefore. So then right now I'm just doing it on you basically. So therefore, or so, a lot of times you'll say so, nobody's really going therefore, but so I have a framework that helps people tell stories really quickly and easily, helps people understand why they're important, and make sure that they are heard with impact and get things done that they want to get done. So you start with the context, the and, the but, and the therefore. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. I actually teach this with all of my, like with clients who are doing big presentations. We actually overlay that structure onto any presentation that they're giving. So I've had clients who were asked to like create a new department or something like this. And we will go through that whole presentation because that our brains are hardwired for story. And if you don't connect with that hardwire, people just start to lose interest, right? And every single story has a protagonist, it has a problem, and then it has a solution. And so that's what this really hits on, all three of those things, even in a very simple story. Or you can use it for emails, you can use it for social media posts, you can use it for when you're so for example, if you were going to be delegating a task to someone, so say what's a common thing that people delegate? I'm just trying to think of something off the top of my head.
It could be, let's just say, scheduling. So right now, organizations and managers are battling scheduling and making sure there's enough resources to work.
Oh, that's a good one. Right. Okay. So yeah. So we say, all right, our organization is having a challenge with resources right now. So that's your context. And we can see that it's affecting the organization really, it's impacting us. And you can say how, like, how would it be impacting them? People would be stressed out. The work wouldn't be getting done, that kind of thing. Usually you want kind of like three things that are happening. So, and this is happening, but we don't really know how to do it. This is where the question comes in. Like, so what's the main problem? What's the main thing that's keeping them from doing this? Would you say?
Keeping them from doing the scheduling?
Yeah. And getting it right.
They are overwhelmed or stressed out, not enough people to plug in the holes.
Perfect. Okay. So that's exactly, so I'm going to make up a solution because it depends on the organization, right? But you would say, but we don't have enough people to fill in the holes. So this could be something that you're talking as a senior leadership team to this. And then you would say, so therefore we're going to either, cut certain types of tasks. We're going to make sure that the schedule is tighter, and we're going to make sure that there's more efficiency. And here's how we're going to do that. So does that make sense? Because you've got this whole story arc that makes it compelling, and it also gives your why, because people need to know why. You don't have to go far into it. You don't have to make it really complex, but they need to know the general reason why. Otherwise, they don't care. It doesn't really matter to them. There's no context. There's no meaning. And just by doing that with basically all of your communications, if you can, will really help you connect those lines between where they are right now and where you want them to be, and help them really get like, oh yes, totally, I get that. And so this is why we're doing it. A lot of leaders really struggle with that. For example, of the scheduling thing, most leaders would just say, we are not doing these kind of tasks anymore. That's it. They wouldn't give any context. They wouldn't give any, here's why I'm doing it. And you don't, like I said, you don't need to get into it super hardcore, like every single little detail, but without the context, people, then you get a mutiny, or you get people who are upset because they don't understand the full context because you didn't give it to them right off the bat. Does that make sense? I know it's very, very simple.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And it's interesting that you say this, because I was recently in a leadership training, and they actually gave a framework similar to this. And it was the same thing, that using the power of stories in your branding, or, just in your communication, and to get the message across is essential. And so this training was for senior leaders or executives within organizations around the world. And so it's very different than, just communicating, we're short-staffed, so we'll figure it out, but to be able to get that buy-in from your team, by being able to give that framework. It just makes it way more impactful, and then it lets everybody feel a part of the potential solution too.
Yeah, because I mean, humans, we make meaning out of everything. And so if we don't help people understand the meaning behind what we're trying to communicate, they'll make it up. And generally, you don't want them to be making it up. They're going to make up way worse meaning than what the reality is from you, right? So the more you can give them that context, the better it's going to go for you and for them. So that's, I mean, like I said, it's a very simple framework, but it really, it just is so easy to use regularly. And you can go back through your emails or whatever and go, okay, where's my and, where's my but, where's my therefore. And you don't, like I said, you don't necessarily have to say therefore. A lot of times it's so, or because of this, we're going to, something along those lines for the transition. But it just makes such a huge difference. And especially like the overlay for presentations too, because I mean, we've all sat through super boring, super numbers heavy presentations. And I'm not saying numbers don't matter. They definitely do, but they need to have context and they need to have story, or people just literally cannot remember them. Like your brain engages with stories. I mean, I wish I had, now I can't remember the numbers to, talk about how much your brain engages with stories, but we remember them so much better. And actually one thing that it's really funny, this song, you remember that song, Call Me Maybe from Carly Rae Jepsen that came out like 10 years ago. It's a perfect end button therefore. Hey, I just met you and this is crazy, but here's my number. So call me maybe. And that one really helps my clients remember too, of like, and context and, but therefore, and of course that song became a huge earworm that now we're going to be singing in our heads all day, probably. Sorry about that. But it's just such a great example of how simple it can be and how quickly it can work and how much it really just worms its way into your head. So, that I think is one of the most, I mean, I have other storytelling frameworks, but that one is the one that is just so simple and so impactful and so easy for people to use. And the more you get known for being able to tell stories quickly, well, I mean, they don't have to be quick necessarily, but not with a lot of extraneous details that people don't need. But the more you can get known for telling stories like that, the more you build your brand and the more influence you start to have, because people understand that you get it. And that's what it's, that's what they need to understand in order for you to, build your brand and keep moving up in a way that's appropriate for you.
Wow. I think that's awesome. So it makes me think. So I am a medical laboratory scientist by background, so very technical. And a lot of times when people are introducing themselves, they especially in my industry, they tend to go heavy technical.
Yes.
And by the time they get out, kind of what they do, the person is gone.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like,
and that
okay, this is too much.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is a perfect one to do for like your intro pitch, So what kind of work did you do in your, did you have anything in particular that you focused on in when you were a laboratory technician or technical laboratory doctor? I think that's what you said, right?
Medical laboratory science.
Medical laboratory science. So was there a particular niche that you had or something in particular that you worked on while you were doing that?
So my zone of genius is clinical chemistry and toxicology.
So what does that mean?
So
because I'm a dummy about this stuff. So what does that mean for me?
So when people typically think of chemistry or toxicology, they think of drug screens. So like right now, when they think of toxicology, they think of CBD oils. Is my drug screen going to show up positive? How much of a drug is in my system before it shows up positive? When will it be out? I got a drug screen for pre-employment that I got to take. So that's one area. If I'm giving an example, that's typically one that I give because that resonates with people. Hearing about marijuana or medical marijuana or CBDs, because those are things that are in the news. But on the chemistry side, people tend to resonate more with glucose, or somebody has diabetes, or they say sugar. So it's in the chemistry area of the laboratory that particular testing is done.
Oh, great. So these are perfect. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. So you could do an ABT with this, because you can start with, and actually a lot of them, especially with the elevator pitch type stuff, I'll usually start with, how, and that's actually inviting them into a story, because they are starting to picture, they know this triggers this thing in their brain where they're like, oh, I do know how. Like, I do know how drug tests work, because we all have to take them at some point in our lives, right? I do know that you need to test your blood glucose if you have diabetes, right? So you can start with something like that. Like, how, diabetics really need to test their blood glucose levels regularly, or else they'll have major problems. And they'll say yes. And they'll say, so, and you can go, and also there's this thing with the drug tests, like we do drug test stuff. I mean, this is really off the top of my head and really bad right now, but this is the direction you go in. But so what would be the main problem or the main thing about what you do that most people don't know? Is there any but there that we can add in?
Well, one of the things that people don't know is, every methodology for drug screening is not the same. So, every platform has a cutoff value, meaning that the level of detection between detected or not detected is not the same. So if you go to my lab and then you go and have the in-home drug screen, it's not apples for apples. So mine may be more sensitive than what you may have that you get at a drugstore or something like that. So people,
interesting.
Yeah, so people they don't think about that. They be like, well, it was negative on what I got from Amazon or somebody else, and now you're saying it's positive. And another thing that people don't think about is, the sensitivity of my test could be testing for different metabolites than what the in what your screen test for.
Interesting. See, and so that's your but, right? Like, you're differentiating what you do from a lot of other things that people don't know, right? And so you can condense that a little bit, but that I think would be really interesting, right? But most tests don't catch what needs to be caught in whatever way, right? Like, I'm just paraphrasing, but and so then you're therefore is we need better tests. My tests are more sensitive. Would that be the differentiator for you? Like the thing that would be the therefore for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you think you go cheat the system, you probably are not.
That's perfect. Because there's the sensitivity, and this is in my lab, and so this is where we get that sense. Like, this is where this type of drug sensitivity testing can come from. So does that make sense? Like, we just did that as a real general example, or not general, it was specific to you, but like a very loose example. But this is exactly how you use it in an introduction. And that is interesting to people, right? Because they can relate it to themselves or somebody they know, and they can go, oh, wow, like, I didn't know that. So there's the curiosity piece too. That's what the but is there for, is like creating that tension. Like, every story has to have a tension. If you just say, I got up and went and made some coffee this morning, and then I sat down and drank it, it's like, whoop-de-doo. But if you say, like, I got up and I went to my coffee machine and there was a severed hand next to it, that's a different story, right? Like, there's a tension there, and the curiosity goes off, and the excitement goes off in our brains of like, ooh, what's going on with his hand? So it's just like a really good way to bring that tension in, because we always want to close loops. We always want to know what is the answer to the loop. So what you said about most people don't know this, that's a great but of they don't know this, and this will be interesting to them. You've already drawn them into this story, and then you help them get curious about your story. Because I mean, I remember I was at a conference years ago, and this poor woman, especially, you were just talking about this as the introduction thing, she had memorized, it must have been 5 minutes of like an elevator pitch. And the poor thing, I mean, I did stand there with my eyes glazed over and like politely nod. Can I tell you what the hell that thing was about? Absolutely not. Like, I have no clue what she did or what it was about. All I remember is just how bored I was, and how I was just like, there's no way I can get out of this. She wasn't even pausing to take a breath. It was like, you couldn't even go, I gotta go to the bathroom. Can you just hold it I mean, you could not get out of it. And it's just, you don't want to do that to other people. And you want people to remember you. So, the more you can think about the way, and it's not bad to actually, it's great to memorize bullet points of an elevator pitch or an introduction. I think it's a really smart thing to do, because you'll make it unique every time you do it. But that, okay, I talk about I'll talk about drug testing and blood glucose. That's my, how.
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk about most labs are not very sensitive. That's my but. And then my therefore I'll talk about my lab being great. My lab being more sensitive. That's all you need to have memorized, right? And then people are interested in it and it flows. It's not like, you're trying to do 10th grade Shakespeare camp or some, dumb, boring thing. Not that,
Right.
not dumb, boring, but it can be, right? So that's where it can be really, really helpful that way. So yeah, thanks for that great example. That was perfect.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I think stories are now even more important to have in your repertoire. So I know for me, that's one of the things that I am constantly looking for stories and trying to keep those examples so that when the time comes, because if you're not technical, you're like, okay, that's too much. I can't relate. Or if I am pitching myself for an opportunity, whether it was a career promotion or whether I wanted to be the lead on a project or whatever the case may be, I know that I have to move fast. I got to draw the crowd in. And in this case, the crowd could be the hiring manager, it could be the decision maker. And I need to do it quickly and not be all over the place. And there's some things that, that's just not going to stick. That's just not going to make you memorable.
And that's one thing I encourage my clients to do is to keep track of their wins, right? I call it the cheat sheet of awesomeness, or you can call it anything you want, but it's a spreadsheet. And you just, especially if you've got projects that were good, big projects or whatever, my sister works for a rebranding agency. They rebrand for banks. And so she's a project manager, right? And so for certain projects, I'm like, you need to talk about what was wrong. You need to talk about, can I say a cuss word on here? Is that okay?
They may censor you depending on what that cuss word is.
It's just, okay. Well, it'll rhyme so people will get it. You need to show the grit and the shit. You need to show what the bad things were so that you can show how you solved that problem. And so you can't, you don't want to make it as like, well, we had all these problems, right? But you do want to say like, look, we were $200,000 over budget. And by doing this, this, and this, we were able to come in under budget. That's big. People want to know that stuff, right? But if you just say, oh, we had some budget issues, not interesting, no context, isn't specific enough, So that's where having that list of things that either were problems that got solved or were big wins, and you can talk about like the stakes that you had to overcome to get to those big wins. Always going to be interesting, especially like you say to hiring managers or whoever is, and you can just throw it out like that, like 2 sentences. We were way under, it was when I came on, it was this much over budget. When I left, it was that much under budget. That's really compelling and really interesting, and that's something that people are going to connect with. So, yeah, I definitely, but it's hard for us with I think with, everybody has a negativity bias to a certain degree. And for a lot of us, it's hard to remember that stuff later on when we need to remember it. Like that's a lot of my clients like struggle with that. Like, oh, I get flustered and it's hard for me to come up with examples. And so when you sit down and you start to think of examples, again, it can feel a little bit stilted while you're doing it. But then when you start getting to those, like, you don't need to have your little note cards where you're sitting around going, and actually, but you just have that in place so that it's kind of in your memory and you can start to pull that stuff out because you've taken the time to be intentional about it.
Right.
And think about, and thinking about, what I also do with clients is have them categorize what are the key attributes that you want people to think about you, right? Do you want them to think you have integrity? Think about some stories that show that you have integrity. You don't just walk up and go, hey, I got so much integrity. Like, I'm doing jazz hands, but you don't walk up and do that. But you can say that through your stories. And so you can start to think about the stories, and you can start to think about, well, what attribute does this highlight that I want to be part of my personal brand? And then you can kind of pick from those stories as well about, okay, well, here's one about integrity. Here's one about resilience. Here's one about, having grace under pressure. And that is a way for you to show, not tell. I mean, even though you're telling, right?
Right.
I don't need to draw a picture of it, but you're showing what happened in a way that people can really understand.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think you made a good point there that the stories mean stories make a big difference. And I know for me, there's a story that I tell all the time because it really had an impact on my path. And the story was around investing in myself. So a lot of times I get people to say, well, you were doing this leader. I just had it today. I got a note. I completed a leadership program. And it was like, I know you busy and I don't know how you have time to do all of this stuff. And that's commendable. And it didn't always start out that way where I felt like I could invest or, somebody else could invest in me. And so I can remember working for an organization. And at the time, I wanted to do a leadership training program. And they said, no, you could do the program, but we're not going to cover the cost. And the cost of that program was $2,500. And they said, well, we won't cover the cost of the tuition, but if you want to do the program, we will cover your time away from work. And so I can remember thinking like, now who do they think they are? Like, me participating in the program is going to help you. Like, it's going to help me, but it's going to help you, of me being a better employee. And so I was at a crossroads. I had a decision to make, do I participate in the program or not? And I'm going to be honest with you. I was torn. Like, how, like, really? Like, they're not going to pay for me to be in this program? How dare they? But I was torn because I was thinking to myself, like, they want me? They want me to pay to invest in myself and do this program? And it made me think, like, why would I expect the company to invest in me if I wasn't willing to invest in myself? And so for me, that was a turning point for me in investing in my personal development, because I had that choice that I had to make. And it was like, I can't expect somebody to do something that I'm not willing to do myself.
Wow.
And so, so I'm like, and the thing is, it wasn't about the money. It was, I think it was the point. Like, I need them to, that pay for that, because studies even tell you that outside of a formal education, sometimes people don't invest in, the next step, master classes, mastermind, whatever the case may be, if it's not getting a degree or getting a certain certification or stuff like that. And so, I thought, and I was like, okay, like, I'm gonna go for it. Like, I'm having this battle with myself. Like, am I gonna go for it? Am I gonna make the investment? And that was a turning point for me. And my whole mindset is that you can't expect somebody to do something that you were not willing to do for yourself. And for me, I kind of question, like, is this worth it? But what I was really saying is, am I worth it? And so, I tell people that story, especially when I'm mentoring and coaching people, or when I'm doing presentations, because sometimes I get that deer in headlights when I talk about, making an investment, and people, they see the whole iceberg effect, right? So they see on top, they see people getting promoted. They see people moving into lead roles. They see opportunities coming up for people, and they like, well, I don't like, they doing it. I just see that they got a degree, or I see that they got this years of experience. But what you don't see is you don't see, the investments that they're making in themselves. You don't see their personal board of directors. You don't see their mentorship circle. You don't see the late nights, the early mornings. You don't see, the sacrifice that they make. So you only see the tip of the iceberg, but there's so much that you don't see. And just to bring it back to this topic of personal stories and personal and brands, is that, if you don't create your brand or your narrative, guess what? Somebody's going to create it for you, and you may not like it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And actually, you did an ABT with that story, because you did, like, but was the kind of crossroads, and then therefore I decided I was worth it to pay for, So do you see how that? I mean, it does flow through. If it's a good story, it definitely follows that structure, and that is a fantastic story about this kind of thing, because you're right. And this is, sometimes we expect things from our employers that we're not willing to. And actually, this is something that I was thinking about earlier today was, I mean, I think that some of those questions that you had sent me ahead of time, you asked what's some of the best advice you've ever gotten. And I would say the golden rule is one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten. And also to ourselves. So, how would you want to be treated? Do that, for your employees, for your partner, for whoever, but also to yourself. And this sounds kind of silly because a lot of times we'll treat ourselves way worse than we would treat other people. Even though we wouldn't want to be treated by other people that way, we'll treat ourselves that way. And that's exactly what you were talking about in your story, was like, okay, well, I didn't think I was willing to do that. And because for whatever reason, we all do that to a degree of like, well, I'll just work this one extra hour and da-da-da. And it's like, if you had your best friend or your sister or your daughter doing that, you would go, don't do that. Why are you doing that to yourself? But yeah, you'll do it to yourself, so I'm getting a little bit meta here, but yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's a powerful message. That's a great story for that.
So if you are here in our virtual learning lab and you have some questions for Cassa, make sure you drop them in the chat. We will answer them live. I think she gave us a great framework that we are able to apply, and stories are the difference maker. Like I said, that's huge right now. So I'm in the lab space, which is in healthcare. And really what makes things stand out is patient stories. How did we help? How does that make a difference in the lives of others? While people, technology is great, but really people want to know, so how did this help? How did this help somebody? What was the end goal? So I think it's that framework that she gave. If you think about that, and even think about that when you're interviewing, because now everything is situational based questions. They want to know, what was the problem? What did you do? And what was the outcome? And if you use that ABT kind of framework, that will help you when you're trying to think about your story or how you're going to answer those questions.
Yeah. And because I don't want people to get, some kind of, complex about it, but a lot of people will talk too much, and so practicing that stuff is going to help you cut that down too, because we'll repeat ourselves, we'll give too many details, we'll kind of go off on tangents that don't need to be there. So especially if you're going to be in an interviewing situation, sitting down and thinking about that stuff, and I think most people do that anyway, but being able to understand, like, okay, it needs to have this as an overlying structure. It'll help you to not ramble, basically, which is really important.
Absolutely. So I like to ask all of my leaders and mentors this about some of their learning lessons along the way, because, somebody that might be watching this podcast after the fact or listening to the audio version may say, Cassa, her story isn't my story. Everything's been well for her. And so what has been some of your learning lessons along the way? Because I think it's important for our viewers and next generation of leaders to know that, yeah, you may see somebody that's successful and showing up today, but that's not always been the journey.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So, when I was in my early 20s, I became a high school teacher. I was like 23, I think, or 22. And that was a really challenging time, especially to be that young doing it, right? I taught sophomore English. And I was really scared. I had no clue what I was doing. I was in front of, 40 students all the time. I had no idea who this Miss Grant thing was going to be, right? So I was always Cassa, and then I was going to be Miss Grant, right? So I didn't even know this was a thing. And there's a really great book about it called The Alter Ego Effect. And it's not about fake it till you make it. It's more about embodying an alter ego until you basically become that alter ego. And so for me, it was Judge Judy because I felt very insecure about being in a position of authority. I felt very insecure about being able to manage my classroom, which is the hardest part of teaching, is managing behavior issues and what have you. And so I would watch Judge Judy every day. I mean, who wouldn't anyway, because she's hilarious. But and I would kind of embody her, you know. And I wasn't trying to just pretend to be Judge Judy, but it just gave me that little extra strength and backbone to where I wasn't necessarily doing what I would do normally, but I was embodying somebody who how I thought I should be, which is somebody who has a sense of humor, someone who's fair but tough, and somebody who is trusted. Right. And I didn't know I was doing this at the time, but I totally was. And I mean, I would even pick up Judge Judy phrases like, you can talk till I'm tall and you're short, but that doesn't change facts. Like, you know, she's so sassy, you know, but but that's what I wanted. I wanted something like that. And I've done that several times in my life around when I was really feeling unsure, when I was really feeling uncertain. And actually I did write, I was part of a coaching book last year, and there's an exercise in that if people want to grab it. It's called Activate Your Life Volume 3, but I call it like, what would super you do? Because people talk about, you got to be this person, you got to be a leader, you got to do what a leader would do. But if you don't know who that is, it's really hard to be that person, right? Because you are you. But the whole idea is using stories and using archetypes like a leader or a warrior or a judge to help you understand what that person would do and how they would be, makes it so much easier to start to be that, right? Like I said, because I don't like fake it till you make it. I get what fake it till you make it is, and I think they're trying to do this. But fake it till you make it can just be another way to feed your imposter syndrome if you're not careful, because you always feel like a fake. But with this, it's more like, no, I'm going to be like Judge Judy, or I'm going to be like Wonder Woman, or I'm going to be like, one of my clients had Black Panther, which was fantastic. So, you know, it's just like all of these different archetypes that you can use to help you get stronger and better. So that was something that I learned really early on with teaching. And one of the other things I really learned, I was working in Antarctica on and off for about 5 years, and I had an employee. It was a winter down there, so it's dark for about 5 months down there during the winter, because just the way that the Earth's axis rotates. And people they start to lose it, you know, they start to really, you know, this messes with your circadian rhythm, and you don't sleep very well for the first 3 weeks. And it just starts to get really long. The hours and the days feel the same. And I had this employee, it was just he and we had started at kind of the same level years before. And then I became his boss, and I did not really truly think about the boundaries that I needed to put into place in order to make that relationship successful as it was evolving. And it was a horrible failure. I mean, I had to get HR involved towards the end of the season. My boss was very, very supportive and really amazing and helped me a lot. But I could see that the main reason was that I had not created good boundaries at the beginning. I hadn't been clear with him about my expectations. And then the whole thing devolved really quickly because I was being too chummy with him, which it was hard not to, because we had been friends. I mean, and I still do think of him as a friend in that instance, but I feel really bad about how that all went down, because I screwed it up. You know, he has his responsibility too, but I could have done it a lot better. And you don't learn that stuff until you do it.
Right.
And sometimes the biggest lessons that we learn are because we totally screw up. And, but those are the ones that last. Those are the ones that make you better. And so I think that was such a powerful lesson for me, because I realized that it really, and this is something you learn if you work with kids as well, like, you're hurting them more by not putting in good boundaries than you are by having to be the tough guy or the tough person, the tough woman here and there. And once you have the boundaries in place, everything gets so much easier. People feel safer. They understand what's going on. They understand how to be. But if you don't do that, they're not going to get that. And everybody feels unsafe. And that's not good leadership, frankly.
Absolutely. I think people really do want boundaries and structure, really.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't want you to be so rigid, but they do want some structure to know, you know, what are our boundaries? What can I do? What can I do? What are the expectations? So that's very important. So,
yeah, because I think fundamentally people want to succeed. They do want to succeed. And if you don't give them the success conditions, they don't feel motivated. They don't feel like there's a point to things, you know? And so that's where the boundaries are so important because they understand, here's how I succeed. It's very simple, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'd like to ask my mentors too, what are you reading or what do you do for your personal development? One, what are
Mm.
you reading? And then two, what do you do for your personal development?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I just recently read that book. It's called How Doing So Good They Can't Forget You, or So Good They Can't Ignore You. I think that's what it is. And that was really a fantastic book because it was talking about, there's a 10,000 hour thing about, okay, if you do something for 10,000 hours, but it was talking about how, if you really get to a level of expertise, you're going to get bored with it sometimes. And it's pushing through that boredom. And I think that that's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Um, it depends on what the expertise is that you're trying to build, but I really enjoyed that book. So I definitely, I read a lot of books around uh, definitely self-development. The Big Leap is another one that I really like, Gay Hendricks, because he talks a lot about like these upper limits that we create for ourselves and how are we holding ourselves back with these kind of upper limit issues. And then of course I definitely work with a coach, and I also, several coaches actually, because I think that whenever you have another perspective to help you, that's when you start to get stronger. And that's when you start to be able to get yourself outside of whatever story that you're telling yourself and that you're believing that's not really helpful to you. So it's not that I think that there's, we make up stories all day, every day, right? Like how we interpret things as a story, how we understand things as a story. So anything that can help me get out of those stories, not that I can't believe in myself or understand what's important to me, but just so that I'm not thinking that certain things are the only way to be, or the only way to do things, that kind of thing. I really love it when people can push me out of those boundaries a little bit more. So those are some great ones. And then I take coaching programs too. I like to be part of group coaching programs, usually 2 a year, something like that. So I'm not, I don't want to overwhelm myself. Because then you don't implement. So it's like that blend of having that information, but also having the time to implement it, and the scheduling implementing it is huge for me. I took one called Leadership Beyond the Theory a couple of years ago, and it was just so fantastic. And he's very straightforward, but it was just, it depends on who resonates with you and what their story and message is too. But I think it's so important to keep doing that, because that's how we continue to grow, and it's always worth it to try to get better. I really believe that.
Absolutely. I definitely agree that you need a combination of things and you need to figure out what works for you, but don't just be a knowledge getter, people.
That's right. A hoarder.
Don't be a knowledge hoarder and don't ever act on the information that you get. So for me, that's one of the big things this year is learn a little bit, do a little bit, learn a little bit, do a little bit. And then that way you are constantly implementing and applying what you know. So for me, because I am a high C wire personality, I like the facts, I like to detail it all the way through and think it all the way through. But sometimes you can kind of, that can kind of have you not implementing because you're trying to get all the information. So I'm challenging myself. I do a little bit, implement, do a little bit, implement. So
yeah, and that's the way to do it, because I mean, you can have that knowledge, but if you don't use it, you're going to forget it anyway. And so then what was the point, right? So and for me too, it's easy to kind of get overwhelmed and go, oh, I'm going to get that course, I'm going to get this course, but then not actually be engaged in the group. And I think that's a really important part of it too, especially if it's a group coaching program. I think you need to be present. You need to be able to engage.
Absolutely. So how can our viewers get and stay connected with you and learn more about your programs and more about this framework and how to be able to apply it?
Yeah, thank you. So my website is cassagrant.com. It's just CASSA, 2 S's. And so they can always find stuff there. I have free resources. I have the Super You. There's a worksheet on there they can run themselves through that exercise that I just talked about, with kind of embodying that super version of yourself, or this alter ego version of yourself. And then, of course, I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram quite a lot, actually. And I'm doing a little bit more Facebook lately, but mostly it's LinkedIn is where I'm really at. And I really like connecting with people there. So I definitely will connect with people if they want to get in touch from LinkedIn. And then Instagram is something that I really enjoy too. So those would be the three big places to find me and grab some resources if you're into that. So I also have a thing about 5 leadership stories every leader should tell. Because every leader should have, so that they can just have this little, I think of it as like Hermione's magic purse full of stories, she just can pull out, oh, here's another one, here's a good one. So that people have that in their back pocket.
Awesome. So if you want to get in contact with Cassa, make sure you go to her website, cassagrant.com. You can also connect with her over on LinkedIn. So this broadcast is streaming over there. So make sure you connect with her there, or Instagram. Reach out. She has some awesome resources that you can take advantage of. And as we get ready to close out tonight's show, what is the one tidbit that you would like to leave our viewers with that they could use in their personal or professional life? We're all about giving you tips that you can use right away.
Well, I think it comes back to what we talked about today. And it's, the stories that you tell yourself are the stories that you're going to start to believe. So what story do you want to tell yourself? What story do you want to tell other people? So getting more intentional about your stories, literally, I mean, this sounds really cheesy, but it will change your life. You can choose those stories, and you can start to tell them and live them. And it can be challenging, but it's always worth it to try.
Absolutely. There's nothing more powerful than a storyteller. So think about some of the people that you admire, some of the people that has influence over you, and think about the stories that they tell. Why is it that you are so intrigued by that person or like to follow that person? It's probably because they resonate with you, and probably because of the stories that they tell.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Well, this has been awesome. I have really enjoyed speaking with you, and you reaffirmed a framework that I learned that I definitely need to make sure that I implement all the time. So thank you so much for coming and sharing with us in our virtual learning laboratory. It's definitely been an honor to have you.
Thank you. This is so fun. I love this show, and I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. You're welcome to come back anytime. So thank you, listener and viewing audience, for tuning in to this week's episode of Leadership Tidbits with Coach T. Wilson. Get your stories. Make sure you apply the framework that Cassa shared with us, the ABT framework. It will help you as you are doing your introductions. It'll help you as you are interviewing. It will help you as you're selling your ideas. But it really is important for you in your career and or your business. So thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure that you join me on Thursday in our mentorship workshop, as well as our roundtable event the last Thursday of this month. And so I look forward to seeing you then. Until next time, share this podcast out with somebody who needs to hear it. And until next time, my friends, I hope you have an amazing week.